Hey guys, this is Calm. I'm here with Fusion. We're doing the LMB version of the World Championship 2013. It's between Anand and Carlsen. We've just seen Carlsen win as white to take the first victory in the match. So he's up 3 points to 2, and he's going to be black in this game. So Anand lost the first critical game in his last World Championship against Gelfand, but then he managed to come straight back with a win last time. So we're going to see if he's able to do that here. We've seen Anand playing e4 in his other white games so far. He played the white side of Khan in the first one, and then Magnus switched that up by playing e5 last game. But he managed to get a reasonably easy draw in both. So Anand will be looking to press a bit harder this time if he can, I think. So Fusion, say hi.
Sup, yo?
Okay, that's close enough. So we'll just get straight into it then.
Okay, so first move for Anand is, let me see, 1h4.
Wow,
Well, that's pretty,
I wasn't expecting that.
pretty interesting move. And then, wow, I guess that's just winning, right? No, e4.
E4, yeah.
That's the one you remember.
So, e4, e5, so we're getting a copy of the last game, it seems.
Knight f3, knight c6, and then, oh dear, it's another Roy Lopez, which I guess is fine. But it's quite theoretical, as we saw before.
It's fine for me, because I used to play this a lot, so...
Yeah.
I
saw the amount of theory that comes with bishop b5, so I thought, I'm never going to learn this. Instead, I'll play bishop c4 and sidestep everyone's opening prep.
So I think last time we saw knight f6 here.
You see it again.
We saw castles, I think, last game. Here he's playing some anti-Berlin line with 4d3. So this is actually what I played against it as well, just because it got kind of annoying. Obviously in the last game we had instead castles, and then takes e4 and then d4, and then, you know, knight d6, bishop takes c6, d6, c6, d takes e5, and then trade of queens. You got that Berlin endgame. So this is kind of a way to sidestep it. It's a bit of a slower plan, because ideally in the Roy Lopez you want to play c3 and d4 as quickly as possible. Whereas here you have to play d3 to support, and then you play a slower c3, d4. But obviously this gives extra options for black, such as bishop c5, like he plays here. So it's still a fine line. Well, it still has a small edge, but it's just not as critical. And I think basically by playing d3, Anand's kind of admitting that he can't really find much against it, given how easily black kind of held last game.
So he plays c3 here, which is continuing with the idea, the slow build-up of pressure on d4, and just, you know, doing stuff, giving an escape square for the bishop as well, eventually.
Yeah, just for the people who don't kind of know this line as much, I'll just show that if we just take this here, it looks like we can win a pawn by trading and then taking on e5. Actually here we have queen d4, which threatens the mate on f2, so you're actually just winning a piece there. So that's kind of the trick, that's why you can't immediately take on c6 and e5 there. So yeah, you can have that, but then we take here, so... so yeah, yeah, you have some...
Check! Oh no.
Yeah, but of course, white only has two pieces here, the bishop and the knight, and black's got three, so you can give this bishop or whatever. And then we're...
Yeah, yep, good point. So anyway, c3, castles, rook e8. This is all pretty standard. Rook e1. One of the reasons also behind this move is typical Roy Lopez plan is to bring white's b1 knight to d2, then to f1, then to g3 or e3. Yep, so obviously, yep, that's I did do a little bit of.
That's good. I'm impressed you know that, because generally it's not an obvious plan, I'd say, to people who don't play the position a lot, because, when do you ever do that in other openings?
Yeah, I've seen a few Roy Lopez games, and sometimes I implement it with my Bishop C4 openings, or well, I used to anyway. When I played really boring ones like Vijoko, Piano, super slow C3 D3 build up.
Yeah. Yeah, because that's obviously very similar. You just have the bishop on c4 here.
Yeah, there's transposers sometimes. So a6, bishop a4, b5, bishop b3. He doesn't want to come all the way back to c2 just yet.
Yeah, I mean, you sometimes do after knight a5 here, but obviously whilst this diagonal is open, it's got a lot more potential than on c2.
Yeah,
it's another beneficial way of playing c3 early on, like Anand has. It just gives us this option so we can keep our bishops on for longer. So it gives us greater potential to fight for a win later on.
d6, bishop g5. This is all kind of standard. Bishop e6. I imagine he'll move it back now.
You could do, or you can leave it, and the idea of leaving it is that after bishop takes b3, we retake with the a pawn, and then we've kind of got an open a file, and then we can push b4, and actually a6 becomes a weakness because that's kind of backwards. But everything is kind of playable. Yeah.
Yep. So actually, I prefer that way of doing it, like this. So knight bd2.
Or another option here is if he takes on b3, we can take with the knight, which attacks the bishop, and then he moves the bishop, and then we play a4, and we get an attack on a6 that way instead.
Yeah, I would still, I think, always take back the a pawn. That's just because it's the more aggressive way.
Yeah, I also prefer that way in the lines where black plays bishop c5 instead of bishop e7, like these ones. Just because b4 also comes with the tempo, which I think is kind of nice, and then after that you could have the b3 hole, which you can put the knight on, so kind of all works well together.
So h6 here, kicking the bishop away, and he decides to take now. I guess black's white square bishop was not super important in this variation.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing to consider is that if black does nothing, then d4 is going to come at some point. After, say, knight f1, we're already kind of threatening it almost, so then d4 has the potential to win a piece, because after takes, we attack the bishop on c5, and once that moves, then we have d5, which would fork the bishop on e6 and the knight on c6. And I've actually won a couple on the board games like that at the junior tournaments, with just that c3. Yeah, just that d4, d5 kind of fork plan.
So I'm quite happy if I were white in this position. It looks, got some ideas along the a file, of course. Well, this is kind of strange.
Yeah, okay. So this is kind of it's a move from a different type of Roy Lopez opening. I think it's the Breyer system or something. And
I think that's right.
And basically, the idea is that you've played knight c6 earlier on, but then you bring it back, and the idea is that you play it to d7, and then you can play it yourself to f8, to g6, or to e6, and you also want to drop your bishop back to, say, b6, and then play c5, and then you can even play your knight on b8 back to c6, just to help control over d4, basically. It's kind of slow, but it's generally thought of a very reasonable response against lines where white is playing d3, because his attack is not as fast as it otherwise would be.
Yeah, you got the time here to play around with black and reorganize your pieces. So h3, well, that's kind of strange. Now that the light square bishop is gone, I don't know why this is.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes
helpful.
This can be useful to play knight h2 to g4, but I would definitely have just played knight f1 or b4 first, I think, just something more related to it. Or
I
maybe he just really wants to
guess.
keep his bishop on in case black was to play g5 and knight h5, but that's not really so likely, I don't think.
No. Well, I guess it's not. I don't think it's that's critical. The move
Nah.
order here.
I mean, especially when black's just played knight back to b8, I don't think
Yeah.
he's under any immediate pressure to do anything.
So here comes the knight.
Okay.
Queen e7. I mean, just connecting the rooks and putting the queen somewhere
Yeah, you can also
else.
bring it to e6 from here as well, which means it would get out of the pin, which would be quite nice.
Yeah. Now comes the knight to f1. So they really are doing extremely slow build up here. Bishop b6.
I think bishop b6 was quite nice, because it's not a very obvious move. But I think when you look at black's position, the only real weakness you can say that he has is that a6 pawn. By dropping his bishop back to b6, he now has the option of playing a5 after white plays b4. And that would essentially mean he could trade off that weakness, and then he shouldn't really be any worse in most positions.
Yeah. I think perhaps white was a little slow. I would have maybe if I were him, I would have just put some pressure on the A file somehow, like rook A2 or something, or those kind of things. Just double up on the A file must be.
I'd have liked to see b4 earlier to like solidify that weakness at least.
Yeah. So.
But here, I think white still has threats. I mean, after knight e3, he's threatening knight d5, I guess, to fork the queen and bishop. If you can trade off the bishop, he's doing well. So black has to do something about that, and he does by moving his queen.
Simplest moves.
Yeah, I mean, there's still a lot of play, though, in this position, so I wouldn't be too annoyed if I was playing for the win as white here. We've still got a lot of things to play with. So, yeah.
So he does get b4 in just to stop. Well, it doesn't stop a5 because he can still play it. Probably plays the next move. Yeah. Just to trade off that doubled b pawn. So.
Yeah, but I mean,
you swap weaknesses, or you swap. Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't think white will be too unhappy about him playing that. But I do think that the position of our knights as white aren't optimal at the moment. I mean, knight e3 is pretty good, but knight on h2 is kind of an idea with knight g4, but you want to play that whilst there's a pin on or something. And if the knight on g4 gets pushed away, then it has to go back to h2. So
yeah, now it looks somewhat misplaced on there on h2. So we get this thing, and I imagine this knight will have to come into the game somehow, and here it does via g4. And now bishop b6 back, and you're looking at the a file being contested here.
yeah, exactly. I think if we leave that bishop there, there's always the threat of white just doubling up on that file or something, whereas here, if we were to try and do something like that, we can now just take it, so it makes sense.
So now we exchange our bishop.
Yeah, so I guess his idea is that after bishop takes, knight takes, he can play knight d5 and fork the queen and the bishop, but that doesn't really work, because after knight d5 here, f2 would hang. So I think in fact he can't play that. Yeah. So I'm thinking that bishop takes f6 seemed to give away, any potential pushing potential that maybe he could have, at least in the middle game. So he'd be looking at transposing it into more of a end game push with like this queen g4 move, was it he played? With the idea of playing knight f5 or something like that, or maybe supporting f1 or f2 rather, and then playing knight d5 and just trying to have a slightly better knight against bishop.
Yeah, it doesn't look that great, to be honest, now for Vichy. I mean, from before anyway, it doesn't his attack is gone and he has to go into this end game. And it's not even that clear that he has an edge, really.
In the end game, I don't really think he does. I think the bishop and the knight are about even here, and he doesn't have an open file that black doesn't have. There aren't pawn weaknesses.
I mean, after this, it's pretty clear that bishop and the knight are indeed equal because they've both gone.
Yeah, so in fact I like Carlsen's choice here because he took on e3 and white couldn't take back with the rook because his rook on a1 would hang, and if he decided to trade the rooks on the a file first and then play rook takes e3, then he's given up the a file to black. So either way that it happens, oh well, that would be an issue as well. Yeah, okay, so that's I guess that's the most pressing issue. But even if that wasn't the case, he'd be getting some tiny edge to work with later on.
So he has to take back with the f pawn, doubling white's pawns. It's not such a big deal, I don't.
No, because they're not isolated
and they're hard to attack.
Yeah, and because they're central as well, it's not so bad.
So this looks pretty drawish again.
Yeah, it looks very drawish. Normally what you'd see here is queen e6, trade of queens, and just draw a grid, but
not Mr. Carlsen. Yeah. He wants to play on. He wants to try and get something else out of the game.
Yeah, and basically and queen e7 really symbolises this, because queen e6 is just so obvious a move to play, because if white doesn't trade queens, then you can play like queen b3 and get an advantage that way. So what black is doing here is actually saying, I'm okay with not getting that draw. As would you be if you trade, but I'm actually going to risk getting a slightly worse position than you not wanting to trade and playing queen b3, just to keep the game going on, which is really cool.
Yeah, I mean, of course, yesterday we saw that Carlsen won his match. He's ahead now, and there's no rest day in between. It's just straight into this game. So Anand's mind is a little shaky, perhaps. He wants to try and get that point back immediately, and it looks like he's not going to do it here. And now Carlsen's sort of adding insult to injury by trying to play on for yet another point.
Yeah, because it's like he's already admitted that, okay, fine, I didn't get anything out of the opening, let's just have a draw. And Carlsen's now, having equalised, saying that actually I want to play this for longer.
Okay, so rook f1, just getting this rook on the f file. It's all kind of normal stuff. I mean, at any time, these rooks are probably going to be there for a while, because otherwise, the first one to blink loses control of it.
Exactly, yeah. So, if we look from Carlsen's point of view, the only weakness that he can look at is the double pawns on the e-file. That's the only chance he's going to have to make anything of the position. So he needs to work out a way, if he's playing on, to try and exploit that. So this would be like it. I mean, queen e7's a move you'd play if you were playing someone much lower rated than you, and you were like, I really need to win this game somehow. But he's at the same time he's doing it with no risk because he has no weaknesses. So
it's difficult to see a plan here.
Yeah, well, I think if you look at those double pawns, they're strong at the minute, but they're not so bad because they're connected to something. So I think a good plan would be to try and get rid of that connection. So essentially we want to be looking at attacking
like this.
d3. So yeah, like c5 with the idea of c4, and then if d takes and b takes, the e-pawns would be isolated. So that makes them more of a weakness than they were before, kind of thing. And if white were to play d4 himself at any point, obviously e4 hangs at the moment because we've got a double attack along there, so yeah.
It's just about trying to make weaknesses become weaker and looking at how you can do that in order to make these kinds of plans. I mean, I've been getting slightly better at doing this in these kinds of, quieter positions, let's say,
Yeah.
compared to my normal hectic, crazy tactics. So now you've got to try and work out, how am I going to win this? What's the weakness? And E3 is the weakness. So how can you make it weaker?
Yeah. Yeah, E4 and E3.
Like a good idea. Yeah, E4, E3. So it's just, I guess, Vishy, I don't know, maybe getting out of any possible pins, but I mean, just making a move, essentially. He hasn't got many things to do here.
Yeah, that's the thing. In terms of active plans, Black has this plan with C4, but White, not so much. We can't really get rid of our weakness without playing D4, and to do that is really hard because Black could just trade everything and take on E4. So in order to stop that, we have to play, for example, Rook E1 or something. But then we have the problem that Black could just trade on A1 and then, you know, take on E4. So he's kind of in a position where he can't really improve it. So I think he's just trying to get his king off the back rank or something. Some seemingly useful move, anyway.
So C4. Yeah. And I guess D4 is the only good move available. And Rook takes first, which is, I don't know why that made a difference, to be honest. But
no, I'm not sure it makes any difference.
Never mind. Okay, so then he moves here. So why not take on D4?
Okay. So I think after this, maybe what we see is this. And it would seem like there's no real good way to do this, because if we attack their B pawn, then obviously this holds on to it. So I think that's the reason why he didn't go for it. And even if he hadn't traded on an A1, he could have done the same thing via F5 instead, so I think he just wanted to get one pair of rooks off for some reason. I'm not particularly sure why. Maybe he thinks it's easier to win one rook endgames with the queen instead of two. But that's something I don't really know, because I don't really understand endgames on his kind of level. But yeah, here he'd be able to take b5, I think, which is why he doesn't immediately go for that, trades on d4.
Okay, so he does it this way, with queen b7, just still eyeing that light pawn in e4, just a diagonal in general, really.
Yeah, and so I think if he took on d4, like if he had a free move, then he'd be able to take on e4 with the rook instead, and that would obviously mean that b5 doesn't hang at the end of that line.
I mean, he could do it now, right? Wow.
Well, if he does it now, I think the idea after rook d1 is rook takes, so he's going to hold on to it that way instead. And you know,
right.
It's weaker, but d6 is also a bit weak here, so...
Yeah, it's difficult because it's defended enough times that you can't really change that.
Yeah.
There's no more... Well, it's just going to be slightly more difficult too.
Yeah, I mean, basically, I think we'll see what turns out to be pretty much the game continuation, where we get that kind of thing. But I think one option for white may have been like d5 instead of rook d1. Just kind of cementing the pawns, and yeah, it was still a bit off, but you know, I think having these open e pawns against black's rook is still it's kind of risky. Even if we get d6 in return, it's, you know, I think it's very easy to see how you know, we can get a pawn up in those variations anyway, which is useful to press.
So here we are. This is the game, and we do get a similar position to what we looked at. And now rook e5 comes in, just kicking away the queen.
It also stops rook d5 in a lot of lines as well. But I think the idea here for black is just he's going to move his queen to, say, you know, e6 or e7, just to put more pressure on that e-pawn. And then I think he can have a very slow plan of just something like g6, king g7. So he's getting his king safer and everything, and then he can maybe think about f5 or something like that to really exploit the weakness of e3.
Yeah,
kind of
okay.
his kind of plan.
So Queen F3 here. So something. I don't know. Maybe something like Queen E8 here.
Yeah, Queen E8, but then maybe he just takes on D6. So
Yeah, but then you
know,
take on E4, and then you could take on E3 as well.
yeah. Well, maybe in that line you can play Rook D8 or something.
So this is my thing. Rook
So
D8.
something like that. It might be some like tricky way because we force the queen off.
You're so tricksy.
Yeah, so I think that may actually be the reason why I didn't go for that. But otherwise, yeah, it would be a decent plan.
All these things you have to calculate.
Yeah.
That's the problem. When you have fewer pieces on the board, you have to calculate deeper.
So I think, the plan of Queen E8 to take the E4 pawn is good. So he's basically going to go for that plan, but he's just going to do it, I think, via E7 instead of E8. So
yeah.
Queen C7, he maybe got some vague ideas of pushing D5 and having some discovery, but I think not really, because you'd always play Queen G3 or something.
So now I would have a similar kind of plan for white with Queen D1.
Yeah, so Queen D1, but then if we look at, I don't know, do the discoveries do anything with like D5?
Well, I can just move out of the way.
Okay, but then we can take on here.
Yeah.
And if we were to play, if we just go back and move, if we were to play this, then we'd have this with check, and then we'd lose the queen.
Yeah, that'd be unfortunate.
So I guess that's why you can do that, yeah.
So, okay, that kind of explains why he moves the king out of the way.
Yeah.
First of all. Of course, now you can't do it, because you need to hold on to this e-pawn.
Yeah, so basically it's going to be exactly like the line you said before, but there's no like tricks with Rook D8. So yeah, he's just going to dance around the protection of the E4 pawn, I think.
And then, as you said, here comes the slow plan. Nothing she can do. I guess he might want to play. Well, what's the merit of something like G4 here to?
Maybe, but it's still kind of risky because we're opening up our king without really opening up black's king. Because maybe H5 could be played or something similar. And if we can ever take back with the rook, it's a situation where there's less pawn protection for it. I think the best plan for white is just to sit around the protection of the e4 pawn, even though it's kind of annoying.
So if we've got a lot of dancing around here, I guess. Oh, that was. So this is definitely. So this is a change. He's not protecting it now.
Yeah. So rook e6 was kind of. I'm going to protect d6 with my rook, and then I'm going to be able to move my queen maybe via f6 to e5 or something like that. But by playing queen g3, he's kind of saying, I don't really want that slow plan. I'm just going to try and transpose into a rook endgame where I'm a pawn down. Kind of, I don't know if it's, I call it a debatable choice, but it's did he have to do it is a big question. I don't really think he did yet, but
I mean, he only spent 3 minutes on this move.
Yeah, I think he just thinks the endgame should be drawn regardless.
He's thinking like he did yesterday.
Yeah, which is risky, as we saw.
Risky. So, of course, now being snapped off. This pawn being taken, sorry. And now he basically loses a pawn. So Carlsen thinks he can win this rook end game.
Yeah,
pawn end game.
So I mean, this is kind of how we looked at before, where he could play rook a5 to take the b5 pawn. But the difference here is obviously that the rook's on the 7th rank, so we can actually play rook b7 and defend it. So, yeah, black's just won a pawn.
I mean, probably. I think this still looks like a draw to me. You put this in the endgame table bases. Once they have being created for, what is it, 10 man, 12 man.
Yeah, I think this is a bit much for them, but it's yeah, it should still be a draw because if we get rid of all the pawns on the left hand side of the board, then the 3 against 2 is a draw for sure.
Yeah. So let's see how Vishy tries to make this happen. So rook e6. So this is all kind of endgame technique, which is really tricky to explain if you don't know what it is essentially. I mean, it's so hard to calculate what a small pawn move will do, like 20 moves down the line. So it really becomes a nightmare.
I think my part of the problem for my endgame is that I spend so much time earlier. By the time I actually get to these endgames, I don't have enough time to really think it through enough. So I'd say that the endgame is one of my weaker points of my game, but the idea of rook d6 was, of course, to stop king f6 coming in and the black king walking in. So f6, the idea is instead to be able to protect the b5 pawn via other means. So that could be via rook e7 to e5.
Yeah.
So then he's supporting it along the 5th rank, and his rook is more active than it is on b7. You can also play with some idea of g5, king g6, and king f5, and get his king out that way, so it's not blocked by that rook d6 anymore.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was looking at. Yeah, so these kinds of positions, you can't really learn how to deal with them in the traditional sense, really. You can't find a book on endgame positions. Well, you can, but it's not the same as openings where you do have a set position. Endgames, they can vary. Just some small details will change the evaluation of the position quite significantly. So I guess you have to do it by experience, because computers, again, they're not always perfect in these endgames, because you're just essentially going past the point of where a computer can calculate. You're going past the horizon, so they're not always that great. So difficult to see how this will continue, I guess.
Yeah, so I guess, I mean, there's that plan of g5, king g6, so maybe white's going to play against that. There's a few options. You can just play something like king g3, king f4, get your king more involved.
Yeah.
Or
so they made.
You can go with another option, just trying to like block black's plan instead.
Yeah. So they made the time control a few moves ago on the exchange of queens. So now they've got over an hour each to deal with this position. So
you'd hope for a high quality endgame, basically.
Yeah, and Carlsen's always full of tricks in the endgame, little traps. So Fish has to be a little careful. So h4, stopping. Well, I guess trying to trade off pawns.
Maybe. Or maybe it's on g5. He actually plans to play h5 and stop that g6 square from black's king.
Yeah, perhaps. So
king f7.
Carlsen's king is just gonna come around, and now, well, straight away h5. I mean, I guess this will work because.
I mean, it's.
If he plays g5, it transposes, and if he takes, then he's just going to get it back pretty quickly.
Well, you'd think so, yeah. I mean, it's not like he's giving a full pawn, because it's going to be doubled, it's going to be isolated, and it's kind of ruined the 3 connected pawns. But at the same time, if black does take it, then he's going to have that g6 square for his king again, so he can move his king more into play. So it's kind of a risky way to do it, I think.
He can just walk his king to h5, but I guess then
you have to worry that
you've got things like f5 to block it off, and you get to keep it. So I guess this move is preparing possible f5 if, for example, like king h4, does that help? Because now no checks available, and he gets to hold on for a while. I'm not sure. I mean, I'm just making moves, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, maybe if we go back, instead of King H4, if we play King F4.
Yeah.
Okay, wait, let me move it, but... Oh my god.
What do you want to do? King F4.
King F4, okay. So I was thinking maybe an idea for black could be like this, and just give the rook, but then we play this. So we're forced to trade here, and then this is just a win for black, because he's going to be able to trade off and get that pass pawn there, and then walk his king over to the B and C ones. So
yeah,
I think your plan of King H4 is maybe better, because we can't play that F5 move to block as easily, because the king's going to be, vulnerable to that trick to get into that endgame.
okay. So just rook c5 here, just stopping the king from coming in and the rook from leaving the b file.
Yeah, it's also very useful to stop just a b4 plan from black, because then you can just take on c4.
So, okay, when he plays, he goes to the h file instead of the f file, which I think is different. So now he's what's the trick here? Why can't he just take? Does he take in game? Yeah, he takes. So after rook takes, king e4 check. King has to move.
Yeah, so I think this was maybe the reason why Carlsen took the h pawn, because he saw that he could give the b pawn. At least he's still up material. It's not as nice material because of the pawn structure, but it's it's still a pawn.
Yeah, and the king's in a better position than the white's one, and
yeah, he's actually able to move up as well.
Yeah. So this is it. So yeah, rook b8, typical idea in rook end games. Stick it as far away from everything else as possible.
Yeah, and try and check from behind. I mean, even though we say that Carlsen's making progress, it's still very much a draw. I think it's very hard to actually use these pawns to create anything.
So h5, and here comes that plan of just checking, but he can hide, and he does on h5.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, now it's difficult. I mean, he has to be careful, I guess. Vicious now, things like rook e2.
Yeah, or if he was blind, he could just allow Carlsen to play rook e1 and then rook h1.
h1, yeah.
Maybe.
So that is a little tricky.
But I mean, the rook goes back, and he decides to defend with the the rook instead of the king. Because obviously, if you defend it with the king, you just get checked again, and the position will repeat.
So rook c8 now, just attacking that pawn.
Mm-hmm.
And imagine he might go back here to f8. Yep. And instead of going for the repetition, because obviously Carlsen wants to try and squeeze a set until win, he extends the agony, as it were, and this is the only move.
So I think by doing that, what he's doing is just creating an extra square for the king, potentially on g4.
So now what happens here on rook g8 check? Well, we'll find out. So does the exchange of rooks help? Probably not, because...
Yeah, I'm pretty sure here if he actually played rook takes rook, he'd lose, because we've obviously got 3 against 1 on the king side there.
Yeah.
And
the king can come across and
yeah, I'd say here you just play rook c8 and it should be a draw, because there's no way to defend the c pawn.
Yeah. This is all...
So I'd actually say after that check, probably black has to go back to h5, because he needs to be able to defend the c pawn via the rook g4, I think.
Okay. So now we have equal material again.
Yeah, I mean, here you can think of tricks with king f2 and rook takes g2, but then of course you have rook f4 check in between, which pushes the king away, so it's awkward. So instead he plays this f4 plan, which his plan is basically, I want to trade your g pawn for one of my h pawns, and then I'll have a passed f pawn, which is really close to the end. Still, this shouldn't particularly be a problem. He just has to be able to get his rook in a position where he can keep checking the black king, and it should be fine.
Yeah. So, not quite sure where he's going there.
Yeah, so rook a4 is kind of interesting because he's basically saying I want to check you from the side instead of from the back, which is still okay, but it's riskier because we've got our b and c pawns in the way.
Yeah, if he plays something like rook c8, I guess he can come to king. He can bring it in, so I don't know why I did that, but...
Yeah, probably that's why rook a4 then, I guess.
So, what about things like pushing the pawns, right? Give Carlsen there something to worry about.
Yeah, I mean, that seems reasonable. I think it's good because we're still, attacking the f4. And if he goes for this trade thing here, it doesn't really make too much difference because, again, we always have that rook takes f4. So, the only useful king move is king f3, and then even then it's not that useful because we can just drop back to h1.
Yeah. Okay, so let's see what happens in the game. So you've got this h3 stuff. The rook comes back, and now...
You see, now I think we have a problem, actually, after playing c4, because we need to be able to check. I mean, maybe even before... Maybe we were meant to play the b4 instead of rook a4, and maybe it's still okay, but I definitely think we need something off the second rank, because we need to be able to, check the king there if it ever does get to that point. Because black's just looking to put his king behind the pawn or behind the king and be able to promote, essentially.
Yeah, because this looks pretty bad now. This pawn is running.
Here you can check on the third rank, but then you can just go to the second, your own pawn's in the way.
He tries doing this, but
now it's too late.
Can just come here, and he can go one more up, and now there are no more checks. He can go and defend, or he wants to do that way.
But you can just play,
Yeah, you can play rook g1 here, and now... Well, it's up here. Yeah, rook g1. And now if something like this... This is what was going to happen. He can actually run behind
white's sand pawns, and then there's no way to stop the promotion.
And then, yeah, queen.
And with that, the game.
So, yeah, white resigns in this position.
So white resigned after rook g1. Yeah, it's unfortunate because even though Carlsen's played that endgame well, again I thought Vishy had a lot of opportunities where he was equal, and even close to the end it was still meant to be equal. He just somehow caught himself up between his own pawns, which is just the kind of pressure I guess Magnus puts on you for playing such long games against you.
I mean, I think instead of that rook a4 move, if he goes and plays something like b4, of course that stops him checking, but probably causes
along the side. But
so let's see what would happen if we kind of follow the game, but with this b4 move thrown in. So I guess now you want to come and look from behind here.
Yeah, I mean, it's awkward because I'm not amazing at endgames, so I wouldn't want to say things with certainty, but yeah, I'd just go up and try the checks along the back there.
So
And
if
then
you're
if he ever
black,
goes to take the c-file, then, you know...
so if you're black, what would you do here? If you try and
Okay, maybe something like this.
yeah, king f2, then I'm gonna run my pawn. And I'm not worried. Okay.
So maybe something like this is getting awkward now. But actually, maybe you can even take, and actually your pawns are faster. Because after this, you can just put your king here. And although I'm going to mate you when I get my king to h7, you're going to be able to promote with check against me. Which is basically going to mean that white actually wins. So it would mean that black instead has to make another plan whereby he can't push his f-pawn as hard. He has to, you know, use his rook to kind of negate white's plan a bit, which would basically mean we're going to have an even game rather than, you know, leading to that kind of passivity white had at the end, and then the pawn pushes were just too late to do anything about it.
Yep. So here we just go back and forth, and it's a draw. But you know, it's difficult, I guess, end games.
Yeah.
It's tricky. I mean, it's easy to say in hindsight, and when you can move the pieces around.
Yeah, I mean, definitely Magnus is good at them, but, you know...
You would expect the world champion to be able to hold that position.
I feel that, yeah, 2 games in a row, the world champion losing such a supposedly equal end game is a little bit disappointing anyway. So we'll see if he can bounce back in the 7th game. Or he will have white again because the colours switch over halfway through.
Yep. You get a rest day as well, so he can have some time to mentally recover from this really bad 2 days he's had.
But yeah, he's gonna have to try something a bit more aggressive. I think he needs to play positions which are more suiting to his tactical style. I think compared to these long drawn out kind of positional equal games where Magnus just really excels. He seems to be doing really well at the start with the forcing of the quick draws and so on. But it seems to have kind of Magnus is more settled in as the match has gone on.
Okay. I guess we'll wrap up there, and we will see you again in time for the second half of this championship on Game 7. And hopefully you'll join us for our L&B coverage of that match then. Alright, so
See ya.
thank you and goodbye.